I believe it is really noticeable that I like ships that use lasers. So today it will be time to take a look at one of my personal favorite battleships, the Apocalypse Striker. Now, I did fly the Megatron Striker, that was actually my first Striker battleship, but I quickly changed that ship into the Apocalypse Striker, and ever since then I was using this ship. Now, the Apocalypse Striker is also known as the king of PvE. This ship has excellent tracking, excellent range, and excellent DPS. And of course, it has excellent damage application, which makes it the player's favorite for missions, and in my case, one of my personal favorite ships for PvP. Now, the Apocalypse Striker doesn't have any roll bonus, however, it has pretty decent skill parallel bonuses. The large laser upgrade bonus will give you plus 8% large laser damage, plus 7.5% large laser optimal range, plus 5% large laser tracking speed, and the advanced battleship command will give you plus 5% scan resolution. So far on paper this looks pretty good, and I can tell you from my personal experience, engaging a PvE Apocalypse Striker in low sec is really risky. Because even at 40 kilometers, 45 kilometers, these ships can hit you and they can track. Ship has 2 drones, 8 high slots for medium, 6 low slots, 3 combat and 3 engineering rigs, primarily a armor tank. It has a pretty decent cargo hold capacity, also pretty decent defense, 109,000. 16,000 is the capacitor, 131 seconds is the recharge time, 44.8 gigajoule per second is the recharge rate, can lock 8 targets, signature radius 308 meters, scan resolution 125, slender strength 30.2, flight velocity 112 meters per second. Surprisingly, the Apocalypse Striker isn't slow, it's actually fairly fast, definitely one of the faster battleships in the game, and one of the reasons why I also really like this ship. Now, this is the build that I use for this ship for the last couple months. These are the C-type large pulse lasers. The A-type pulse lasers are currently on the Belgoron. For this ship I like to use C-types. 914 EM, 558 thermal damage, 39.64 km is the optimal range, 6.1 km accuracy fall-off, tracking speed 8.55, which is so far really good. I am not complaining about the damage output on this ship. Now this is the PvP build that I like to use in a fleet or in a gate camp with dual neutralizers, one scrubber, one web. Now for the drones, I have large drones, however I personally prefer to use medium drones, but currently it looks like I don't have any Mark 9 medium drones available, so I will keep on using the large drones. 1 capacitor battery, micro overdrive, damage control, and 3 heatsinks. Basically, I really like to use this build. Sometimes I swap the damage control for a 4th heatsink, and that also runs really well. Now after the April balance patch, the DPS was slightly reduced, however, the passive effect of the modules has been greatly improved. As for the rigs, well, this is one of those ships that doesn't have any rig integrations. However, I actually plan to get rig integrations for the Apocalypse, or if I decide not to use integrations, then I plan to use triple aerators. Basically, that's the build for maximum possible DPS. Currently have dual aerators and 1 collision. That's basically the build that I used and that I still use after the balance patch. The rigs are thankfully not that expensive. As for the engineering rigs, you can go with warp core optimizers, you can go with auxiliary thrusters, but I would actually go with capacitor rigs, because the Apocalypse Striker does have a good capacitor, but the lasers, especially the beam lasers, do use a lot of that, so you want to have maximum possible capacitor stability. And of course, with this build, you can't expect to have a lot of tank. Basically, this ship is designed only for DPS. The tank is not that important on this Apocalypse Striker. Now, let me show you the current maximum possible DPS that I have on this ship. And of course, I will show you the kill mark location. I think you can see them. They are on the right side of the ship, basically where my mouse is. I have around 50, 65, 69, I don't know how many I have, but still working on that. Haven't been flying that ship in a very long time. So current DPS is almost 2.3 thousand, which is okay. Maximum velocity 869.84 meters per second, and the tank, well, of course, not the best, because this is after all a ship designed for DPS only. With the damage control you have decent resistance for around 13 seconds, which can help at warping away or can help in some certain situations. In my case, I did have to use that module only once, and that was when I was engaging a dreadnought a couple months ago. The siege mode was also changed. You cannot warp anymore. You get plus 100% damage, but tracking will be reduced by minus 95%. So basically, moving targets will not be able to be hit by this ship. Should have tracking of a dreadnought with the siege mode. Very decent damage on the lasers, by the way. 0.43, which is comparable with the tracking on the Minmatar dreadnought, which has 0.45. But of course, at long range and when your target is heavily webbed and scrambled, they will be able to take damage from this ship. 3.4 thousand is the cold DPS with the siege mode active. And of course the signature radius will be increased. Now it's 616 meters. That's one of the things that you get from the siege mode as a penalty. Capacitor lasts 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Now, time to take a look at the DPS with the heatsinks active. With one heatsink it's 3117.43. With dual heatsinks the DPS is at 4.3 thousand, which is really nice. And with 3 heatsinks the DPS should be around 4.8, 4.7 thousand. I was close, which is so far decent DPS. I'm quite satisfied with the current DPS output. Now let me dock and I will show you a couple other builds. Of course, we'll show you the DPS with the 4 heatsinks and with beam lasers, because I know that the Apocalypse Striker is a very good sniper. It has very nice range with the beam lasers. Now, fun fact, you can dock with the siege mode on these ships, but you can't dock on a dreadnought or carrier. Now, with 4 heatsinks, 3.5 thousand DPS is the cold value. Now it's 4005.20 DPS. With dual heatsinks, it's 4486.05. With 3 of them, it's 4.8 thousand. And with the 4th heatsink, should be around 4.9, 5,000, very close to 5,000 DPS. So overall, really good DPS output on this ship. And this is practically the build that I would use for PvP. This is the build that I actually used for PvP on this ship. And I can tell you, it's really fun when you have a couple of these ships in a fleet with the same build. Now this is the build and DPS with the beam lasers. They have 75.5 km range, 19.52 km accuracy falloff, 0.14 tracking speed. This is because I did dock in the siege mode, so the tracking and DPS and of course the overall alpha damage will be affected. Now let me undock and let me show you the cold DPS value on the Apocalypse Striker. The beam lasers in siege mode can actually hit small ships at very long range, so tracking is really not a problem on this ship. With one heatsink, it's 3236.71. With dual heatsinks, the DPS is 3322.54. With 3 heatsinks, the DPS is 3890.19, and with 4 heatsinks should be around 4,200. 4025.33. Okay, that's still really nice. Of course, with the beam lasers, the DPS will be a little bit lower, but the alpha damage and range will be greatly improved, comparing them to the pulse lasers, of course. I still like to prefer pulse lasers over beam lasers, but the beam lasers also have a very nice PvP use. Now, let me show you the cold DPS without the siege, 1001.67 DPS, which is still really nice. Okay, and now let me dock. I also have the build with dual target painters, which is really good and helpful if you use this ship as a sniper. Should help at hitting the targets with beam lasers, and of course you can use this build with pulse lasers as well. This is basically the build that I would use in high sec encounters. In low sec I would still run with dual neutralizers, or I would run with dual webs, one neutralizer, or triple webs, depends on the situation. Of course you can use dual webs and one target painter for PvE as well, but a lot of players like to use tracking computers and heatsinks. And honestly, I also like to use heatsinks and tracking computers on this ship. You can get some really nice range and really nice tracking. Speaking of tracking computers, this is one of them. It does increase the range and accuracy quite a bit. And of course you can overheat the tracking computer and you can push out the range and tracking even more. Now, if you plan to run high sec missions, then one armor repairer should be enough. And I will just quickly swap that mic warp drive for one afterburner to help the capacitor out. You can use a mic warp drive, but you would need dual capacitor batteries. In my case, the afterburner is really good for high sec missions, and I personally did start to use the ship for PvE a lot more often, and now the capacitor is 5 minutes and 5 seconds, which is overall really nice, and definitely a lot better than 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Now the DPS will be a little bit reduced with the one armor repair, because I had to sacrifice one heatsink, but in the end the DPS should still be really nice. Or I can actually sacrifice the afterburner, which is actually a good idea because you really don't need a lot of speed in high sec missions, and I can actually swap the afterburner for the 4th heatsink. That way I will have the armor repair and I would have the DPS. So let's do a couple missions with the Apocalypse Striker. Now the alpha damage on all strikers is so far really nice. However, the Megatron Striker suffers from poor range and suffers from, I think, poor tracking. It's easy to orbit outside of the optimal range on that ship. The Tempest Striker doesn't have quite the DPS, but it's an excellent sniper. It has one of the highest alpha hits out of any ships. The Raven Striker, well, I think all of you know what I'm about to say for the Raven Striker. Let's say the damage application on that ship is not the best. However, the Raven Striker is actually really fun because it has a very nice tank. The Raven Striker is definitely the tankiest striker out of the current striker battleships that we have. But the damage application and the siege mode on the Raven Striker is definitely not the best. You can use that against stations and against capital ships really effectively, but against other battleships it's not going to do a lot of damage. Now the Apocalypse Striker is still fairly tanky if you build the ship to be tanky. We have a couple of them in Corp that are really tanky. But in my case, I really like to use the Strikers only as DPS ships. However, having a good tank is sometimes a lot better than having only DPS. So I will develop a tank build for this ship. I think I'll actually buy a second Apocalypse Striker and make that ship for tank. Well, this one will be kept as a DPS ship. With 8 type lasers, I did get my DPS to around 6.5, 7,000, I believe. And of course, I don't have a nanocore on this ship. One of the ships that I use without the nanocore, I practically don't really need one. Currently, I am waiting for a nanocore on the Stratios to arrive, but who knows? Maybe I will buy the nanocore for this ship, because why not? And yes, if I were to buy a nanocore for this ship, I would go for DPS. I think one of the new nanocores was actually really good for the Apocalypse Striker. Basically, you would get extra EM or thermal damage, and you would get overall extra laser damage on this ship. So overall, the DPS potential on the Apocalypse is really nice. Now, I did fly all strikers in PvE, and definitely the Apocalypse does have the, I would say, one of the faster clear times. I did manage to get faster clear times with the Megatron Striker, but that was very lucky, because I practically got a lot of missions spawning at this one system. So that's basically the only reason why I did get a higher ISK per hour value on that ship, but I would still say that the range advantage, the tracking advantage, the damage application advantage that you have on this ship definitely outperforms the Megatron Striker. Which doesn't mean that the Megatron is a bad ship. I like it. I actually like that ship. It's really good for PvP. Excellent when you have a scout that will scout to target, and then you can warp directly to the target at close range. Then you are able to apply all 9000 DPS that you have on that thing. Now, as for the Apocalypse Striker, well, you can do the same thing, but at long range, and you don't have to worry about getting close. And of course, the damage application is significantly higher, which is very good for both PvP and PvE. Now, one thing that I know players like to do with this ship is to be almost AFK while running the missions. And this is where the Apocalypse Striker with the beam lasers will kick in. With beam lasers, you practically only have to sit at 100 kilometers, lock all targets, use the heat sinks from time to time, and of course use the tracking computers from time to time. And that's practically all that you have to do with this ship. With pulse lasers, the clear time will be a little bit faster because of the higher DPS, but you'll have to be a little bit more active to switch targets to web targets if necessary. But you will have a little bit more ISK per hour. And of course, I cannot mention AFK mission running without mentioning the best AFK PvE mission ship, which is the Typhoon 2. That ship is amazing. I really want to fly the Typhoon into PvP. I have a build prepared for it. I'm just waiting to finish with the Hyperion, waiting to finish with some other ships that I fly, and then I will be rolling the Typhoon 2 into PvP. Now that thing is scary. It doesn't have the highest clear times, doesn't have the best DPS, but man, is the Typhoon fun. Yes, it is. The only thing that you have to do with that ship in PvE is set auto orbit, lock all targets, and click on the missile launchers, and the ship will clear everything for you. That's how the Typhoon basically rolls, because It has excellent missile damage application, and it's fast. So that's basically how the Typhoon 2 runs. Or in my case, how I will use the Typhoon 2 into PvP. I already have a lot of ideas with that ship. I was very impressed when I flew the Typhoon 2 after the April balance patch. That ship has been significantly improved. Now of course the DPS will be around 2.5, 3000, while this ship will have around 4.5, 5000, or in some cases 6000 DPS, but the Typhoon 2 has its own thing, which is working really good on that ship. And I cleared the first mission really easily. Okay, well, let's go to the next one. I still use the pulse lasers with heat sinks, basically the same build from the first mission. For the third mission I will swap into beam lasers, just to see how they work after the April balance patch. Someone actually asked me if I ever tried to use beam lasers on the Balgorn. I actually haven't, but it's a really good idea when you are in a gate camp, because pulse lasers on the Balgorn don't have enough range. The pulse lasers on this ship are pretty good. They have really good range, and overall you can make the range on the pulse lasers on the Apocalypse Striker reach around 100 kilometers with 1 or 2 tracking computers. So technically you can replace the beam lasers with the pulse lasers at around 100 to 80 kilometers. But at that moment I would actually pick the beam lasers, because they would have 150 kilometer range, which is very impressive. But in the end, I think every player will have their own preferred weapon of choice. I like the DPS on the Apocalypse, so in most cases I run pulse lasers. Back when we were fighting that Phoenix, I actually did use the beam lasers over the pulse lasers, just because I wasn't really sure what the Phoenix can do. We knew that the Phoenix was a big bait, and of course at the time we did not fall for it. Almost killed the Phoenix with 6 or 7 Apocalypse Strikers. It was really fun. In the end the Phoenix had to call for a big fleet, and we all of course did manage to warp on time. Was really exciting, and well, this ship was part of it. For the first half of the fight I used beam lasers, and then when it was clear that the Phoenix was slowly going down, when the capacitor of the Phoenix was actually starting to fail, I swapped to the pulse lasers, and of course the DPS was greatly improved, and we almost had the Phoenix. It jumped with 0 capacitor and 50% shield, but it's okay. It was a phenomenal fight. It was really exciting. That was one of the best moments that we had in Syndicate, basically as a small corp. So that one armor repair did do the job really nice. Now this current build is not really that good for Serpentis missions, and overall not good in Galactic Space, because I will take kinetic and explosive damage, mainly kinetic damage, where the resistance is not the best. I think it has around 25 or 34% resistance, so really not the best to use this build for the Galactic missions, but it should work really well in Amar Space, where the main damage will be EM and thermal. Your resistance on that will be a little bit higher, and the one armor repair will be able to handle that without a problem. With a tank build you can basically do all missions in all regions of the game, but I will still go with the DPS, because in high sec you only really need DPS in the end, because The higher DPS is, the faster you can clear the missions, and the higher the ISK per hour will be. Now, you know, I'm not primarily someone who is mostly doing missions. I'm mostly doing the ships that are doing missions, player ships. So yeah, that's basically my favorite thing to do in this game, PvP, and most of my ships are mostly 100% turned towards the PvP aspect of the game. Even the PvE builds that I usually like to show you are focused on PvP in mind. Basically, it is a improvised PvE fit with PvP aspects in it. A good combination of both, good combination of DPS and tank, and so far they work really well. I know a couple of players that use my builds. So far they haven't lost a ship. In fact, all ships that engaged them didn't have a very good day, because those builds are scary sometimes. Especially the brick tank ones. Those are, I think, the best ones that I ever made. I have other plans with some of my ships. I'm actually looking at the Balgorn at the moment. The Balgorn, if built for DPS only, can actually have around 4.6 to 5,000 cold DPS, which is kind of ridiculous. Of course, the tank on the Balgorn will not be the best, but for high-sec mission running, it's actually impressive. Most likely we'll buy a new Balgorn that will be only for DPS, just to see how that thing will look. With my current build that has tank rig integrations, the cold DPS when I do a build similar to the Apocalypse Striker is around 3.2 thousand. Now that is the cold DPS with tank rigs, and I think I did use A-type or B-type pulse lasers. I kind of forgot which weapon I used. Let's say I used A-type pulse lasers. 3.2 thousand on a full tank build is actually not bad. It's actually really good. So I expect around 4.5 to maybe 5,000 DPS if I focus the Balgorn only for DPS. And I think it will be a very fun little project. The web bonus that you get from the ship is also really useful. You can slap dual Nosferatus and triple webs, 3 heatsinks, 1 afterburner, or dual armor repairers, and that should last for a very long time. Or even 1 armor repair with 4 heatsinks. That's actually the build that I currently have on the Apocalypse Striker, and here I am using the sniper build with 1 tracking computer. I thought about using dual tracking computers, and I thought about sacrificing the armor repairer for another tracking computer, but eventually I decided to go with this current layout, and so far it does hit really hard, and of course it has very decent range. Now in the high sec missions at 85 kilometers you will not take a lot of damage, so you don't even need to have a shield booster or armor repairer. In the case of the Apocalypse Striker, well, you would definitely not use a shield booster, because the capacitor on this ship with beam lasers is really not the best, because the beam lasers already use a lot of capacitor, so that's why the capacitor on the Apocalypse will be low most of the time while you are sniping. And I remember the talk where some players wanted the Apocalypse Striker nerfed, and then I actually remember that quite well. Someone mentioned that if the Apocalypse were to be nerfed even more, then he would be able to fire like 3 beam laser. You will be able to fire only like 3 beam lasers, and the capacitor would be pretty empty. I think the balancing factor on this ship is definitely the capacitor. While you have very good range, very good damage application, very good DPS, and overall very good alpha damage, the capacitor will definitely keep you from doing something silly like using all heatsinks in the low slots, because you will have to focus on keeping the capacitor alive. Because as we can see, even with almost all battleship skills on level 5, the capacitor on this, in my case here, is still low. With the beam lasers, I would say optimal dual batteries would be really nice. Dual capacitor batteries would be really nice. And I would say in the future a build with capacitor boosters on this ship will be really nice. Now the capacitor boosters are practically modules that use a separate charge to recharge your capacitor, and I'm very excited if we eventually get that module in this game. Alright, well, that was a very nice little run with the Apocalypse Striker. I have a lot of plans for this ship. Will be one of my main PvP battleships very soon, as well as the Typhoon 2. Still working towards making some skills optimal, because I actually did reset a lot of skills for the dreadnoughts, so now I have to slowly balance things out. But when I finish that, the Apocalypse Striker should be even more lethal. So with that being said, I really hope that you enjoyed. Stay safe, fly safe, and I'll see you next time.